Hey, welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name's Andy Littleton. I'm sitting across the world from Eric Siepen because we're back on Zoom because Arizona's withering away. And so, anyway, it's a bummer not to be in the studio, but it's the right thing to do. Eric and I today, we were talking about, we started off with things like the Lincoln Project and the AND campaign and vote common good, not your conscience.
I'll try to put links to all three of those so people can kind of go explore them.
Great, that's a good idea. And then we talked a little politics in the church after that. So I think it was good. All the way through. Thanks for joining. As usual, this is Andy and Eric having breakfast and working something out. This is not
coffee.
Yeah, and coffee and a little pink plate. Look at that. I really ate it. But this is not the Village and Mission Church laying down statements. Mm-hmm. So hang out with us. Consider the conversation. Maybe you have some thoughts. Maybe there's something you'd like to recommend to us at faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com. Talk about in the future. Thanks.
Take it easy, man. Enjoy your meeting.
All right, there we go. Well, coronavirus, it's bad.
Yeah, I just figured it probably safest to not be in a small square.
Yeah. It's hard because I don't know about you, but it's obvious. All the evidence is that, it's terrible here in Arizona. But I see things around us. Even my mom's independent living home just sent out an email that they're reopening more. And I'm like, why now? You've done so well with this. Why? And it seems like that's a lot of things. But then if I'm honest, even I feel that way too, right? Because I don't want to not be in the studio. Or anything else. It's tough.
Yeah, it is. It is tough. But I just feel like, especially since I have been meeting more people outside, kind of tried to keep it to that. That means my exposure is a little higher than it has been when we've met in that room.
Right.
So.
Mm-hmm. No, it's the right call. I'm just saying it's like this internal struggle where you look around and all the evidence says dig a hole in your yard and climb in it and cover yourself with earth.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't feel like it, but in March when, probably it wasn't nearly that bad.
Yeah.
I was hand sanitizing every 5 seconds, and
yes,
it's interesting how the psyche and your perception of it factors in.
No, I agree.
And speaking of which,
long time.
Speaking of which, have you seen these Lincoln Project videos? Any of the ads?
I have actually not seen the ads, but I have listened to a pretty extensive interview with all of its founders, and why they formed it and what their goals are.
So I've watched a few of them, and I don't really have the TV on, so I guess these are all over. They're putting them on Fox and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But I haven't really been watching TV, so I haven't seen that. But one of them several of them have been about the coronavirus response, and there's one that's really aimed more at Fox News than it is at Donald Trump. But I guess it showed an internal memo at the beginning to Fox News that said something about we can help through this difficult time. And then it was just all these clips of Fox News anchors, contributors calling it a cold, or saying, I have a better chance of getting stabbed by a heroin needle than getting coronavirus. And, just downplaying it over and over and over and over. And so they really took aim at the narrative that a news outlet spun concerning coronavirus. And of course, that news outlet was criticizing other news outlets of spinning the narrative about coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that's kind of, those videos led me to kind of discover the Lincoln Project in a way. I heard there was a news story that had something to do with how effective they were in bothering or getting under Donald Trump's skin. And so I became a little interested in that. And then it made me think of the AND campaign that's being talked about a little bit I've heard a few people at our church mention it. You sent over this other vote your conscience thing.
I'm good. Yes.
And it feels to me like, it's just interesting. I've been a registered independent for a long time, and I've had a real aversion for a long time about being on one side of the political spectrum or the other.
That doesn't surprise me, Andy.
I know. I've been called the high priest of the centrists recently, so there was that.
Or the high priest of the centrists.
Yeah. But it's interesting because here I've often felt like there just weren't a whole lot of people in that boat. A few, but not much. But all of a sudden, it's you've got the Lincoln Project, which is devout Republicans opposing the Republican and really like pushing to elect the Democrat is what's happening. Vote Your Conscience. I mean, their stated purpose is probably more similar to the Lincoln Project. It's just a different approach, but it's to not reelect Donald Trump. Like, that's the stated purpose of the organization. The AND campaign's been around before Donald Trump. And so their stated purpose is to combine like social action and biblical values, like morality stuff.
Right.
And it's a movement of urban Christians especially. But it's that's interesting to me. How do you read that desire to put these things together and not have it's like it's not divisive, but it still really is, because it's still pitting something against Donald Trump.
Sure.
As explicitly with the Lincoln Project and Vote Your Conscience. It's explicitly doing that.
Well, yeah. Well, it's vote common good, but yes.
Vote common good. Vote Your Conscience.
Yeah, you can do that
Vote
too.
common good. My bad.
Yeah. The idea of voting for everyone instead of voting for just your little political kind of wing. But so my thought is that a lot of these are going back to what Ronald Reagan believed. And he always said that for someone to be 80% your friend, that doesn't make them 20% your enemy.
Hmm.
And so if you can get together against a common enemy with those who may not agree with you in all places, but you agree to a percentage, or maybe about the core values of liberty and...
Well, that's all you're ever going to get is a percentage. You're
Right.
never going to find your clone.
Right. The rule of law, those kinds of things that they feel Donald Trump has completely violated. They can all get together on that.
Yeah, the common enemy theme is something I thought of. And I would say I would exempt the AND campaign from this in this moment because they predate this particular situation. But the other two movements seem very much like a united. It's uniting against a common enemy, and that enemy is the president.
Yeah, and I'll say this. So since Ronald Reagan, the Republicans have ruled.
Mm-hmm.
even with the election of Clinton and Obama, both centrists who were slightly left when they first were elected, and appealed to the moderates and maybe the southern blue staters. But here's the thing: in the Republican Party, it used to be, you could elect a moderate liberal in Vermont and a right-wing conservative in Arizona, and they all could be under the same party umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
But Donald Trump, and this was really started probably when Obama got elected, but the undercurrents were there from Rush Limbaugh and other populists and nationalists that needed a litmus.
Your Zoom frozen on my end, my friend. I'm probably in the recording, therefore.
All right, I'm gonna try rejoining you on my phone because it looks like my internet on this computer seems to be really flaky or something. Well, we'll try to go for it. Anyway, what I was saying was just the umbrella and the national populist kind of movement. So the litmus test for somebody, so it became very monolithic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's really what, got us Donald Trump, and I think that's what people are kind of struggling to handle.
Now, an interesting thing I thought of, I should say, I guess I kind of want to parse out some of the differences. The AND campaign is strictly, they're saying we are a Christian organization. Vote Common Good is closer to that.
Yeah.
Doug Padgett, he's viewed as
he's a progressive
Christian, sure.
Yeah. So that institution is, they're going to vote for women's reproductive rights they're going to see that as a victory over maybe.
Well, and the AND campaign would say that they actually distinguish that in the common space, they want Christians to stay devoted to what they would say is, probably what I would say is like the biblical vision for human sexuality, but they don't encourage you to necessarily carry that into your public vote.
Right.
And so that's a nuance. And then the Lincoln Project is not religiously tied at all. It's purely political. So,
but if you listen to their leaders talk, they are talking about morality, law.
I have no doubt that, especially being kind of old guard Republicans, that probably a lot of these dudes are.
Yeah, they're half old, and then there are a lot of young millennials who are running that.
And I'm not saying old men, a different brand of Republicanism is what I should speak.
Definitely.
Yeah. Now here's the interesting thing. As I was thinking about all this morning and how these movements are bringing people from different parties together and people who want to nuance things out, what I thought was, you know what the truth is?
Did you really think that? You thought, do you know what the truth is?
Yeah. You know what the truth is? Donald Trump's doing the same thing. It's sad. I hate putting it in this way, but it's almost like he led the movement. He brought people from different, he didn't just come in on a Republican ticket. He didn't come in on a morality ticket. He didn't come in on he's got a unique amalgamation of views that I'm not saying
he came in on a nationalist ticket.
I think he used them. I don't even personally, I
His
think
personal
he knew who he could rally, and he used them.
maybe.
I mean, I just don't know. Like, I haven't watched a ton of Donald Trump in his past life. You know, the dude that supported Clinton and all this other stuff, but it just feels to me like, you know, and this is, I've heard this commentary, but this is my honest appraisal. It seems like Donald Trump's main commitment is Donald Trump.
Yes.
Not so much nationalism or anything else. It's like whoever will get him where he wants to go, he'll capitalize on it.
Right.
And for those he's aligned with to get things done, it's working and they like him, though he may not like them as much as they think he does. That's my read on it.
Yeah.
I don't know. But, you know, I'm just Andy in Tucson sitting outside next to my axe. What do I know? I don't know this guy. I don't know any of these people.
No, they just have an impact on your life. They have an impact on the people who you lead as a pastor and care for.
Yeah. And
your friends. I mean, that's all. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I was preaching on the Song of Solomon this last week, and it's one of the few non-political books in the Old Testament.
Raisin cakes and
raisin cakes and apples, but
wrestling.
The reality is everything's political for the most part. We live in a political world, like rulers.
Yeah.
From the
you
dog
could criticize Song of Solomon. You could find a way. Something about sexual expressions in there.
Yeah.
And if it's a metaphor and it's God and his people, that's very political.
Sure. But it's about love.
That's political.
God's love for people. It's not about governmental structures and what happens when you violate those structures and the consequences of
But what about when those structures tell me how to love?
Yeah. Don't see that there either. It's poetry.
I'm just trying to annoy you.
Whatever. The reality is Jeremiah is like a lot more political than the Song of Solomon.
Yes. Okay. All right. Granted.
But anyway, yeah. So I mean, we are political beings. The real question is, how, as a follower of Jesus, you deal with this? You know, I mean, Dietrich Bonhoeffer would tell us that to be people who separate ourselves from the political process are to be people who aren't following Jesus.
Well, and it took, you know, to be fair, I read a Bonhoeffer biography this year. He would have said something like that after years of processing what was happening around him. His movement was not, he didn't just wake up one day and say things like that. It was years of being shaped and leaving Germany and coming back to Germany and the influence of Union Seminary and there's so many things. Yeah.
Right. And Karl Barth telling him to go back.
Yeah.
It's a decisive moment. But yeah, I think he had to come to that, but he does contribute a view because of his experience. Certainly, you know, Calvin, Martin Luther, all these, you know, Martin Luther King, they all have a journey that gets them to a place. Is this our journey to work out what it is that we're called to? Yeah,
I'm no doubt. And I'm sure just as with, I mean, Bonhoeffer, his version was shared by very few.
Yeah.
It was a very small group that ended up deciding to do what he did, and it didn't, like, quote unquote work, though. No. It left quite a legacy.
Yeah.
You know, similarly, a lot of I don't know, how do you see these campaigns, these ideas, vote common good, you know, and campaign, even Lincoln Project, how do you see them squaring up with some of these powerful leaders who made a difference? I mean, are they trying to be too nuanced? Something that the article I read on the Lincoln Project said was what they're getting right and this is by getting it right, they mean it's working, is that they're not nuanced. They're being very direct and emotional, and they're pushing very hard in the other direction, utilizing the values that they know certain people have. So they're talking about, there's a coronavirus one about the veterans, World War II vets, and how some of them have died of coronavirus, and it just ends with a guy on a ventilator, supposedly. So it's pulling on the strings of the people that have supported Donald Trump, but it's being very direct. Whereas the two Christian ones we're talking about are being trying to be very nuanced. Is nuanced?
Well, I would say that
what's the place for nuance?
Good is pretty out there. They're willing to say they want Democrats elected. That's voting the common good right now.
Yeah.
Or moderately liberal Republican.
Sure.
But here's the thing. I want to say that for followers of Jesus, I think we said this in our last thing, was this is a spiritual war and it starts there.
Yeah.
The conversation, and I think that gets lost. I don't hear that anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think there's an overemphasis on two things: doing things and and then also putting morality on what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So the people from Vote Common Good feel that they are doing the morally right thing, and you, Andy, need to do what they're doing.
Yeah.
To be doing the morally correct thing. And I think that's a very American thing. It's funny, like when I listen to N.T. Wright, and he talks about, they'll ask him, what's the difference between England and the U.S.? And he always says, well, the good part of the United States is they actually want to look deeper at things than we do. He said the bad thing is they think that everything has a right and a wrong all the time. And that we are always looking for the moral answer in every single thing. And so it kind of ruins, or it makes our conversations very difficult.
Right.
And I think that's really true.
Because you're either right or you're wrong. You're being moral, you're being immoral. There's no...
Right, and that morality moves itself from not just, it's wrong to kill someone, it's wrong to take someone's wife. It moves to, you interpret the gospel slightly different. You look at your political understandings are slightly different. That's morally wrong or on the precipice of being,
Sure.
And, you can bring it down to debates over what kinds of pizza to eat.
There are morally right and wrong answers.
Exactly. And we joke about that, but it's true. That's how many of us think.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of what, as followers of Jesus, we have to deconstruct at some level.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in a way it's like we need more moral compass sometimes. So I'll just share a little rabbit trail I've been down not too long ago. But in my custom furniture world, everybody's trying to work down the price, and there's always, there's capitalism and who can make it the cheapest and all that stuff. But then people who will say, I don't know how many times I've heard somebody say, I want something locally made. And then they end up going out and buying something that's, made in India or whatever. And I've thought, because I can't find the documentary on furniture, but as soon as somebody sees, the clothing factories in India, they start to get uncomfortable with the fact that these American quote unquote manufacturers just buy everything from there and mark it up a ton. Now, and I almost wanted to make a documentary, go find what children are building your furniture. It looks cool, but you almost need a deeper moral sense of, I need to spend money that supports things that aren't taking advantage of people and enslaving people. But we do it all the time. We just don't look. So in a way, we need more of a moral sense. But because in our society, we are looking at that in so many areas, and I'm and I'm saying I do one of them, we have become a very moralistic and judgmental society, and we're constantly measuring one another's righteousness. And I'm not talking about Christians. I'm talking about everybody.
Oh yeah.
And we don't know our way around it. And then we get frustrated. So there's the morals that we think are important and we want other people to adhere to them. And there's the morals we think are oppressive and we want people to leave us alone with those.
Right.
And the gospel really does, bring a whole different paradigm to all this, to where you can actually love morals but not be justified by them. And it's unique, and it's just a whole different ballgame. So do you feel like these, like the AND campaign and Vote Common Good, I mean, are they, as you're describing this, they're saying, are they really offering a Christian way? Interestingly, you were talking about the spiritual battle. You know who I hear that the most from is from like people who I know, who I've talked to recently, who voted for Donald Trump and think he's very important, will say it's a spiritual battle. We need somebody who's going to oppose abortion and be pro-Israel. It's a spiritual battle. Everybody who I've heard say spiritual battle wants Donald Trump in there, oddly enough.
Right. And my counter to that is, I'm not talking about a nationalistic spiritual battle.
So work that out. And I know you're not. I'm just saying, like, that's where I hear the language.
Right. So Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and any other institution, in my mind, even if it's got people who follow Jesus in it, are secular institutions that follow the rule of God.
So let's really quick. Secular is just, all it is a group of people trying to work together that who must live together. They live in the same area, city, nation. Secularism is working together with people who are different.
Right. And in those institutions, there are two evil forces behind them. One, there is the forces of darkness that are big forces, like that pick up steam, like racism or unregulated capitalism,
sure,
or unregulated socialism. Like, these are forces and behind them that are empowered by greed, there are forces that evil can push. Then there are also spiritual beings that are behind and want to destroy all of those things. My job is
they'll destroy any version of them, and they'll take any opportunity. Right.
And so citizenship is always secondary in a secular community for followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
Because primary citizenship is in the kingdom of God. And if you don't understand what the values of the kingdom of God are, and you can celebrate the ones that show up in the ruling body, and you can say, wow, that's a very gospel thing. Just like what you should say to people who don't follow Jesus, who act like Jesus. You shouldn't say, yay, that's a great thing. You should say, wow, you're being Jesus. This is what Jesus values. You're doing what Jesus values. I want to celebrate what Jesus values.
And similarly, in the lives of people who don't know Jesus, you can identify something that is anti-gospel, that's hurting them or whatever, and speak to that, and even speak to how Jesus offers something different. You can do that. Yeah.
So when I say spiritual battle, I would say people who say, hey, this is a spiritual battle, we need Donald Trump, I would have to seriously quiz them to say, have you actually spent time discerning together with both your community and a larger Christian community what God is doing and what the enemy is doing? Or have you decided by a set of principles that this is a spiritual battle, and you're just going to go run out there with your sword and say that without ever fasting, praying, and contemplating and asking God to reveal what really he wants his citizens to do? That's not a collective thing we're in. I think it'll look different when we end up playing it out. And look, I think this is American history. Christians are on either side of the Civil War. Christians are on either side of the Revolutionary War. Christians are, the way they understand themselves is going in the world is going to be different.
I was going to say, like, I would, if I had to venture a guess, if people said, okay, Eric, I'm going to commit to that. I'm going to pray and I'm going to seek God with my community. They'd still come out on different sides of it is what I'd guess.
I agree. And I think one of the harder parts is to sit in the middle, because when I sit with people in my church who are conservative and who agonize over the death of young babies being aborted, and I can see the pain and agony in both their own stories, the way they fought, because we have a big activist in our church who's probably one of the more prominent ones in Tucson,
right,
all over the United States. And so I understand, like, his pain as he watches this, and so he's consumed by that violence and by that, and trying to stop that injustice. I can sit there. I can then also sit with people who are on the other side of that, who really want to fiercely fight for the rights of women, and they see the government taking away those rights, and they are doctors who see the effects of these things, and you're like, okay, these are two people following their passion and what they think God's calling them to. How do they live out life together and affirm each other's journey when in some ways it seems to oppose? Well, you can only do that by listening to the Spirit of God together.
Right, and picking a side doesn't seem to facilitate a lot of that at all, or any, very much of that. It's very difficult if you've picked one of the polarized sides. Another thing that was crossing my mind was, just, we know that this happens as it regards the gospel or self-righteousness or something like that. So it would be that it's not as simple to say the devil's over here and God's over here. So let's take like the Pharisees, for example. So the Pharisees, they would say the God is over here with the nation of Israel, and God is over here with being dedicated to your prayers, and God is over here with being, as devout to following the rules as possible. That's God is over here. And Jesus comes in and he goes, no, you've actually, the enemy has deluded your mind. You are self-righteous. This temple will be torn down, and you need to go pray in secret where nobody can see you, because you've actually, the devil's in you. He's tempted you. And then there's the people who would say, it's like nobody can tell me what to do, and they're like in the opposite side of things, and they'll say that the devil's in the system and all this stuff, and freedom of the individual, and so back in Jesus's day, there's probably people who, the tax collectors or whatever, who are like, look, I'm not going to do this temple junk, and I'm not really worried about the nation. I just got to look out for myself. Like I got to work. I got to do what I got to do. And Jesus comes in and goes, no, it's not that either. You're consumed. He didn't say go be a Pharisee, go be a nationalist, but he also said, don't take advantage of other people to get where you want to get. And so it feels like there's always this push-pull. Even just when it comes down to gospel principles, the greatest temptations can be to justify yourself by being self-righteous, or to rebel against God because he's untrustworthy. And neither one of those is what the gospel calls us to. So it feels like these polarized sides are always there. And it feels like in the political world, that's probably also true, that following Jesus is going to keep you from running off in any extreme, because there are temptations on any of those ends. I would say, like, in our current system of Republican, Democrat, left, right. There are major temptations and pitfalls in each of those systems. And Christians are going to have to kind of walk within them, but you better not think that that one of them is safe, right?
I think, the Christians, think about Mount Rushmore. The Christian answer, actually, the gospel answer is to look at Mount Rushmore and say, you think these are your gods? You think these are the people who delivered you? They can be torn down. They don't matter. And to say to the people who are, Native American who wants to tear them down, tearing them down may give you something, but it's not going to give you everlasting peace. Only everlasting peace is going to come from a man who will listen to your pain and story and heal it. That's the gospel. Now,
I agree. I've been thinking about that in light of the monuments. That tearing them down isn't going to fix this. But then again, why did we idolize and memorialize these men in the first place? Like, what is it with all our monuments? And so there's always this like flip side. If you're defending monuments, like, what's that about? But then if you think tearing them down is going to fix it, what's that about? And then there's a more nuanced conversation to be had.
And I think, one of the struggles is that we as followers of Jesus, and you and I of this world, have grown up in a generation where our story is truth. And it's a weird thing because, let me go out on a limb and say maybe something that's going to be really offensive.
That what now?
Let me go out on a limb and say something that's maybe offensive.
Ooh.
Here we go.
Hey, brace yourselves.
But when it comes to story and the African American story, systematic racism exists.
Yeah.
When it comes to the data, it does not. What happens is that we say, those who love the data, they pull it out of the story and they say, oh, look, it doesn't exist. There's no systematic.
Or it's not that bad. Other people get beat up just as much or something.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, there's enough, but on the other hand, then the people with the story say, wait a minute, but my story says.
Right.
And my brother's story and his brother's story and his brother's story, well, they all say. So what happens is, instead of us sitting down and saying, we have a problem, the data does point us to a problem. The story points us to a problem. Let's deal with the problem. We're also we're also in a place where, well, your story is what matters. And so that's what we have to listen to, and that's what we have to act on, and that's what we have to move on. And it's like, well, we're in trouble. I mean, as a follower of Jesus, our job in a lot of ways is just to say, from whatever point God has called us into the chaos. And I think it's very different. It can be the and people. It can be vote common good. It can be the pastor who's sitting talking on a podcast trying to figure it out. It can be the guy who just looks at his neighbor and says, man, I have not loved you well. And so that's what I'm going to do for the next 20 years of my life, is I'm going to love you in the way I never loved you before. These are all the things God calls us. We're not, all made the same. And that's the beauty, is that God created us for particular works that he laid out for us, Ephesians tells us. And they're particular to us. They're not that particular, but they work and intersect with each other in order to do God's purposes. So when I think about it's a spiritual battle, to go back to the beginning, the question is, what is the enemy keeping you from doing? What is he calling you to do that you don't, what is God calling you to do that the enemy's like, you don't have it, you can't do it, you shouldn't, and distracting you from a deeper pursuit of what God is inviting you into.
How do we deal with our frustration when we have this conviction of what we and the church should do, and other people don't have the same one? Like you talked about the people in your church who kind of have they have strong convictions about something, or even if it's not that strong, even if somebody you say, I'm very pro this thing or anti this thing, and they go, I agree with you, but I'm not going to come to the rally. because I need to stay home and make dinner. And they're just like, what? How? Like, this is the most important thing. What do we do with that?
Well, political movements, rallies, protests, those are the things of youth.
Yeah.
That's one thing. The other thing is, how do you teach a community to offer dignity to one another? Like you said, Bonhoeffer didn't just wake up at 17 and say, yes, I'm going to become this guy who stands up to power. And, Bonhoeffer had to go through a process. And he got to his standing up to power. But others stood up to power differently. They snuck Jews out of the country. They created orphanages and schools and then hid those kids and moved them out. They did lots of,
some of them needed to be more covert with that because otherwise it wouldn't have worked.
Right.
Almost needed all the varying strategies, right?
I think sometimes we forget that God created us. He loves our brains. He loves the way we do stuff. It's his design. He's going to work with those things and it's going to look different. The question is I think what people are trying to say that we're all wrestling with it when it comes to Donald Trump and why it's so either side is this a moral issue or not?
Right.
Right. Is Donald Trump as a person evil? And do we need to get rid of him? And I mean evil in the sense of not in a theological sense.
Because then the answer is yes, everybody's evil, but everybody's redeemable. Sure.
Yeah. No. Is he a force that the enemy is using in which we need to remove? If you're talking to the Lincoln Project, then yes, they believe that he is in opposition to morality and the rule of law.
Yeah.
And that he has infected the Republican Party.
If you're talking to Jerry Falwell Jr., he would say he is God's man doing what God, Right?
Yeah. Would he say that about Obama? Would he say that about, no, right? But that is the thing. It's on either side. It's a moral question.
Right.
I look at it and I'm like, I have a hard time because I think, when you become president or powerful, you do corrupt things, no matter who you are.
Oh, I know. Yeah. What president didn't?
And so there's this corruption. So I am very wary of ever saying outside of God is over this person, that they are God's man in the sense of he's acting particularly as a Moses type character.
Now, I wouldn't say that either. But then there's also the side that people struggle with of the sovereignty of God. That would be no matter how ridiculous a person might be, it doesn't mean that God doesn't use something in their life. And so is. And this is we want it to be, it's like all one or all the other. So, my temptation, because already, I'm not a Trumpy guy myself, but the temptation for me is to think that 100% of his decisions are wrong.
Yeah.
And that God doesn't use anything he does ever.
Right.
And that doesn't match up with my beliefs about God, but I can still hold attention of going, maybe some, maybe there's some laws he's passed that are going to turn out to be for the best. But I could still have my reasons to, be skeptical of him as a leader.
Yeah.
Right.
I think a lot of it is encouraging all of us to have grace for people who follow Jesus and who are on either side.
Yeah.
Their story may not be truth, but it is their story, and there's a reason they hold those beliefs, and we have to honor those and help each other see what we're believing in the context of the gospel. And we have to wrestle.
Well, there's an assumption in there too that your story isn't the absolute truth, and that your read on things isn't always
It hardly ever is, and that's the beauty of God. And for me, that's the beauty of God's sovereignty, is that my view never is the right one.
Right.
And yet God is beautifully willing to intertwine our narratives into what He is moving us towards. What His, I always think God's sovereign journey is not a linear line. It's a line that weaves together the free will of man into His purposes.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful thing, is like I can trust that I can hear Him, attempt to follow Him, and He will do what He's going to do in the process.
And my view may not be the right view, but it also has value because of the image of God stamped upon me and the way He's intertwined my story with all the other ones. So I don't, the thing that a lot of believers could do is just go, I can't make a difference, or my viewpoint probably isn't even right, and they just disengage.
Right.
And the gospel doesn't call us to that, but it also doesn't call us to the version that says, I know all, and everybody who doesn't see it my way is an idiot. Right? It's again with like being a centrist, but it's like I have a lot of things wrong, but there's still value in what I bring to the table, and God will use all of it, and I can trust Him.
Yeah, and I think, what we don't do as Christians is begin to look at what's happening around us as God trying to speak to us.
Right. So, even if it's disciplinary.
Yes. Yeah. So, like all of the things that are happening within our culture about race, as a white man, I am called to think and pray and wrestle with my calling in that context. When we look at Donald Trump and his, the things that he's done in office and the way that people are reacting to him, I have to say, okay, well, God, what is God trying to teach me here? What is He inviting me into? What is He calling me to? Like everything is an invitation deeper into relationship with God, and in that a response to God in action.
Yeah.
And I think we a lot of times just want to act or have an opinion or be right.
Yeah. Yeah.
There isn't an easy answer. I wish there was a candidate who 100% represented the gospel. I wish there were policemen who 100% but
what we really want is a candidate that absolutely represents ourselves.
Yes.
I want the candidate that does everything for me that I want. And I think that aligns with the gospel.
Yep.
Because I like it.
Yep. You read the Old Testament, and there's sort of this underlying movement in the more right-wing Christian thing to say we're a Christian nation, right? We're a nation of God, a Judeo-Christian.
Yeah.
Well, when I look at the Old Testament, the only Judeo, government, theocracy, it's terrible for the people who don't follow God at any level. Right. Like it's not just that there's some immoral thing happening out there. Like judgment comes down to the one guy stealing something. Right. It's not. You don't want to claim that. You don't want to claim.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's more the metaphor of the church, which is clarified in Christ, and I think that changes a dynamic in a incredible way, but it still shows us it's not like the safe place to be to just be yourself or something.
Right.
Anyway, hey, I actually have to run off to an appointment. I got to be there in 18 minutes. So
all right.
Let's
comb your hair. So
yeah, I gotta go
put on your makeup and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that'll be great.